we can trust. God's the one that we can readily, freely say yes to without fear, without trepidation.
Yes.
Yes. He lets us know there's more that he requires of us. But we need not fear because of that. Amen.
Amen.
My soul says yes. My soul says yes. We're still in Gethsemane with Jesus as he's praying. We're still in that place in the garden. We're yet with him and the inner circle as they prepare to begin the crucifixion process known as the passion of Christ. And I want to read through verses 36 through 46 again. Actually, I'm going to read through 36 through 42. As we look to touch on Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane, Jesus and his prayer in Gethsemane. Matthew 26, and I'm going to start with verse 36, and we're going to go through verse 42. Now the tongue wants to get tired and everything. But it says, Then cometh Jesus with them unto a place called Gethsemane, and said unto the disciples, Sit ye here while I go and pray yonder. And he took with him Peter and the two sons of Zebedee, and began to be sorrowful and very heavy. And then said he unto them, My soul is exceeding sorrowful, even unto death. Tarry ye here, and watch ye with me. And he went a little farther, and fell on his face, and prayed, saying, O my Father, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not as I will, but as thou wilt. And he cometh unto the disciples, and he findeth them asleep. And he saith unto Peter, What? Could ye not watch with me 1 hour? Watch and pray that ye enter not into temptation. The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. He went away again the second time and prayed, saying, O Father, if this cup may not pass away from me, except I drink it, thy will be done. And he came and found them asleep again, for their eyes were heavy. And we established last week, as we were going through this, that Jesus' first prayer was a petition that if this cup may pass from me, let it be so. And it was a petition before his Father. If this cup might pass from me. This cup being that he take on every sin ever. Every sin ever. When I think about that, I can barely deal with the ones I do. And I can't stand before the Lord. If it were possible, I couldn't look the Lord in the face. Even with the sins that I commit. The silly ones, to the most heinous ones. I wouldn't be able to stand before the Lord and look him in the face if it were possible. Because of what I know Jesus went through. But here Jesus is looking at now taking on every sin from the garden until he returns and taking upon himself and being in the presence of the holy God. Taking on that sin, even becoming the very thing that God himself despises. The very thing that caused separation between God and man. He became that so that the gap could be filled. And in doing so, and in carrying out the will of God and the Father, himself. That there would be a moment in time where God would have to forsake him. In carrying out the very thing that God sent him to do, that very thing would cause God to have to forsake him. To the point where he would have to cry out, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? Knowing that that's coming. On top of having to go through all the physical, on top of having to go through the emotional things that he was going to go through. It brings him to the garden and he asks, Father, oh my Father, if it be possible, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not as I will, but as thou wilt. So, in all of his angst, in all of the trepidation, in all of everything that was going on inside of him, the conflict that was going on inside of him, he's still able to say, Father, nevertheless, not as I will, but thou. It says that he came back to the disciples, and he findeth them asleep. And he says to Peter, he doesn't talk to all three of them, but he calls Peter out. What, could you not wait with me 1 hour? Watch and pray that ye enter not into temptation. The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. Take caution. So there's a rebuke and a warning. And he goes back and prays again. He's praying back into prayer a second time. Oh, my Father, if this cup may not pass from me, except I drink it, thy will be done. There's no petition in this prayer. There's declaration in this prayer. There's no petition in this prayer. There is resolution in this prayer. The Army has a term or a phrase that they use. And it wasn't until I watched a movie that I really understood what it was that they were saying. They say when a command or an order is given, they say, hooah, hooah. Doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Hooah. Why? Come on. Why? What's with the hooah? And in the movie, the guy explained, hooah is an acronym. H-U-A. Heard, understood, and acknowledged.
Oh.
Hooah.
Wow.
So that's their way of saying it. So I saw it in a movie, so I had to ask a friend of mine who I know was in the Army. He confirmed it. It was real.
Oh, wow.
So they didn't just make that up. Hooah! Hooah! So to me, as I was reading through this, and God gave me the revelation that the first prayer was everything weighing on him, and seeing if there might be another way, that he didn't have to go through even that moment of God forsaking him. But he comes back and he finds the disciples sleeping. When he asked them to pray with him, watch and pray. Those were his words. In verse 38, watch with me. He didn't even say pray at the first one. He said, my soul is exceeding sorrow, even unto death. Tarry ye here, watch with me. Watch with me. And he comes back and he finds them sleeping. And they can't even carry out what it was that he asked. So he warns them, he rebukes them, and he warns them, what could you not watch with me 1 hour? And now he tells them, watch and pray, that ye fall not into temptation. Watch and pray. He comes back, he asks them to watch, and they couldn't even do that. But now, in his second command to them, in his second request of them, watch and pray. He's adding and pray now. Watch and pray so that you don't fall into temptation. Pray so that you can help stay focused. Pray so that you can remember why you're here. Pray so that in doing so, it gives you something to do so that the weakness of the flesh can be overcome, outweighed by the willingness of the Spirit. See, oftentimes when I've heard that and used that in my life, it was to say that, oh, the spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. And it was my excuse for why I couldn't or wouldn't or didn't do what it was. Oh, the spirit was willing, but the flesh was weak. The spirit being willing ought to outweigh the flesh being weak.
All right.
Because that's what Jesus is doing right here in the garden. His spirit being willing to please the Father, to carry out what it is the Father had for him to do, outweighed the weakness of the flesh. Because it was some fleshly weakness going on in that moment. Proving that he was 100% God. Proving that he was 100% man. That he's even in this moment. But he comes back. And he says, oh, my Father, if this cup may not pass away from me, except I drink it, thy will be done. In that prayer, Jesus said, Hooah! Heard, understood, and acknowledged. Heard, understood, and acknowledged. And he came, verse 43, and found them asleep again, for their eyes were weary. For their eyes were heavy. Hooah! Heard, understood, and acknowledged. Hooah! Lord, if this cup will not pass from me except I drink it, if the only way for me to get rid of this cup is to drink this cup, hooah! Thy will be done. Hooah! Hooah! Let's put a pin there just for a second. We're going to go back in time to the Old Testament. We don't have to turn there. But you can write these references down. In Genesis chapter 12, when God called Abram out of his country. It says, now the Lord said unto Abram, get thee out of thy country. The Lord said unto Abram, get thee out of thy country. And Abram left. He gathered his family, even took Lot with him, and he left. Didn't know where he was going, didn't know how long he was going to be gone, but he took everything he had and he left. In Exodus chapter 3, the call of Moses. God spoke to Moses. I need you to go before Pharaoh. And we know how that dialogue went. But God, I can't. But God, I can't. But I'm not, Lord. But I'm not. Well, Joshua's going to go with you. Mm-hmm. Go before Pharaoh. Then we have in 2 Kings chapter 18. And the word of the Lord came to Elijah. And Elijah was told to go before Ahab. Elijah was told to go before Ahab. God had this specific instruction for him. And even Jonah chapter 1. That's why I knew the Holy Spirit was moving mightily this morning. Because if you remember in my wife in her exhortation, she talked about Elijah in his moment. She talked about Jonah having his moment. So yeah, that was God doing his thing already. That's why I say yes. Yes. I was over there saying yes. Yes. Hooah. What is Jonah? Now the word of the Lord came unto Jonah, the son of Amittai, saying, arise and go to Nineveh, that great city, and cry against it, for their wickedness has come up before me. Mission, assignment, task. God said, go do it. Moses offered excuses. Well, I can't. But God said, do it. Abram heard, packed and left. Elijah, the next words after, and the word of the Lord came to Elijah and said, da-da-da-da, and Elijah went. Jonah Jonah ran. He didn't just run. Jonah bought tickets and ran. Jonah bought tickets, ran, and tried to hide. When we said God, he hides us from the rain, Jonah couldn't hide from the rain. Couldn't hide from God. Couldn't hide from the rain. So guess what? But guess what? God still used Jonah to carry out his task. Nothing changed. Moses' excuses didn't change it. Abram just did it. Elijah went. Jonah ran, but that didn't change his. Didn't change the mission, didn't change the task. Then we go to Genesis chapter 3. You don't have to turn there, but I'm going to read it. Genesis chapter 3. And the Lord God said unto the serpent, because thou hast done this, thou art cursed above all cattle and above every beast of the field. Upon thy belly shalt thou go, and dust shalt thou eat all the days of thy life. And I will put enmity between thee and the woman, and between thy seed and her seed. It shall bruise thy head, and thou shalt bruise his heel. Guess what? That was Jesus' assignment. In that moment right there, that was Jesus getting his call. He spoke to Moses on the mountain through the burning bush. The word of the Lord, now the Lord said unto Abram. The word of the Lord came to Elijah. Now the word of the Lord came to Jonah. Even Jesus got marching orders. Even Jesus got an assignment task. You know, when you're in the military and you get those pieces of paper coming down saying you've been reassigned from this base to another base. This was Jesus' his marching orders saying you've been reassigned from heaven to the earth. But it's just a teeny Y. It's just a teeny Y. See, we get permanent change of station. That means you go out, you packing up your stuff, you're not coming back to that base unless you get a reassignment back. Yes. See, when you go in TDY, you don't take everything you have. You take just what you need for that mission. Yes. You carry out that mission, then you come home. Yes. You know, there's some good TDYs and some bad TDYs. I've been on some good ones and I've been on some bad ones. See, Jesus was being deployed. He was being sent out to carry out a task, but he would be back. But going out on this task, he would have to go through the single worst experience in his eternal life. It shall bruise thy head, and thou shalt bruise his heel. Think about what Jesus went through on that cross. Everything leading up to the cross. The humiliation, the aggravation. Knowing that at any given moment, he could have ended it. He could have stopped it. He could have called 10,000 angels to come down and wipe out this entire proceeding. But he carried it out. He went through the entire mission. But here, back in the garden, we're back to Matthew chapter 26. We're back in the garden. We know how Moses got his word. We know how Abram got his word. We know how Elijah got his word. We know how Jonah got his word. We just read where Jesus got his TDY orders, his deployment mission. But knowing that there would be a moment where God would have to turn his back on him, it brought trepidation. Everything leading up to it, I'm sure had some weight on it as well. Because no one's physical body, even knowing what it is that you have to go through. Think about people, when I work out, it's for my benefit. It's for my, but it's hard. And it hurts. But I go through it. And I recover, and I do all of that. And the results, I dig the results that I get when I work out. How my clothes fit me. You know, how I look in the mirror and all those kind of things, the results. But see, Jesus, this process that he's going through, it's talking about a bruised heel, spiritually speaking. But everything that he went through is equated to a bruised heel. We do it the opposite. We get a bruised heel, and then we act like we just went through everything that Jesus went through in the persecution, in the coming up to the cross, and even the crucifixion itself. But that's not the point. Jesus knows everything that he was going to have to go through. He's in the garden. And he says, "Oh, Father, if it be possible, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not as I will, but as thou wilt. If it be possible, please let me not have to do this. But your will be done. But your will be done." And you would think, because when we go back to Jesus' baptism, and God spoke in that moment. Nobody prayed. Nobody was seeking the Lord. Nobody was on their face saying, "Oh Lord, confirm." Christ himself was not saying. There was no petition that went forward where Christ said, "Father, confirm me before these that they might know that I am your son." He told John the Baptist, "Do this because it has to be done. It is necessary that I be baptized." He goes down in the water and he comes up, and the Holy Spirit alights on him as a dove, and the voice of the Lord spoke and said, "This is my son with whom I am well pleased." This is my son with whom I am well pleased. Even at the transfiguration, Christ is there. And who's there again? The inner circle. Peter, James, and John. Inner circle people again. And they go up, and Jesus is transformed. He's transfigured into this bright light. And Moses and Elijah show up there. Moses and Elijah. Again, no coincidence that these are two whom God spoke and gave a specific task. Moses, go set my people free. Elijah, go tell my people, get it right. Go tell my people, choose ye this day whom ye will serve. No coincidence that it's those two. So here we are on the mountain transfigured. Peter saying, "Oh Lord, it is good for us to be here. Let us build a tabernacle for you and for Elijah and for Moses." And while Peter is yet speaking, God's voice comes down and says, "This is my son in whom I am well pleased.
All right.
Hear ye him." Be quiet. There's nothing wrong with what you're saying, but be quiet. Just be in this moment. Just be in this moment. When God is doing things, when God is manifesting himself, we don't have to feel like there's something we need to do. Just be in that moment and let God be God. Be in that moment and let, "This is my son with whom I am well pleased. Hear ye him." God spoke. And again, no one was there petitioning him. No one was there pleading to speak. Jesus in the garden, getting ready to carry out the mission that God has called him to do way back in Genesis. Generations and 42 generations? There's a lot of generations. Don't get me wrong on my math. But there's a lot of generations between the garden and the cross. And he's about to bring about the plan of salvation and the moment, knowing that moment is at hand. Pending. It is right. He's at the cusp. The door is about to open to that very moment. And the weight of it all. Having to bear all that sin, none of which was his. Having to become the very thing that separated the ones that God desires. So that we could be reconciled with the Father. Becoming the very thing that caused the separation. And that God would have to forsake him in that moment. We don't know how long that moment lasted. A second, a millisecond, a nanosecond, 30 seconds. Anytime knowing that you've been forsaken by God is too long. Too long. I think a lot of times we read over that passage, that portion of, and we just gloss on to the next verse. My God, why hast thou forsaken me? And then on to the next verse. But that was a moment. That was a moment. But a moment apart from God is too long. Too long. But Jesus goes and asks, can this cup pass from me? Nevertheless, not as I will, but as thou wilt. Comes back and he finds those whom he has poured into, the inner circle of those whom he has poured into, whom all he has to do was watch, and they're asleep. So his ministry isn't even behaving the way his ministry he would hope. Can't even follow a simple order. Can't follow a simple request. He's in this moment of angst, knowing what he has to go through, and all he has them to do is watch, and they can't stay awake to watch. But it's in that moment that he realizes, I have to do this. I have to do this. I would that a lot of leaders today, a lot of pastors, in that moment having that time of angst, and you come back to your church and nobody's behaving right, would see that as a sign. Well, God, you let me know. Thanks. I'm out the door. This is done. It's not going the way it's supposed to. It's not in the point where it's supposed to be. They ought to have been in a place, spiritually speaking, where they should have been able to overcome a fleshly weakness. They should have been able to endure. They should have been able to push through. They should have been able to. But Christ looked at that moment, having that anguished prayer go forward. And he looks at them not behaving. He goes back and says, God, whoa. Heard, understood, and acknowledged. But what did he hear? What was there to understand and what was there to acknowledge? God, who had spoken his pleasure with his son on 2 occasions chronicled in the word, God who took advantage of the moment to say, this is my son with whom I am well pleased, in the hour when his son is about to carry out the very task that he was sent for, in the hour that his son was having anguish over the moment of having to have God forsake him. And he says, Lord, let this cup pass from me. His answer was in God's silence. We fear silence. We get uncomfortable in silence, especially God's silence. We get uncomfortable. We get impatient. We get all these different things because of silence, because we don't hear anything, because we don't know, because all this other stuff that silence represents. But Jesus' answer was in the silence. God's non-response, if you will. The non-manifestation of his voice. Because he told them to watch. As if something might happen. When the transfiguration took place, he didn't tell them watch. He just went up there and things started happening. But here in this moment, when he's in this angst, when he's in this anguish of what's about to go down, he asks if this cup might pass from him. And the Heavenly Father, who we know is well pleased with his son, and the Heavenly Father that we know loves his son, loves his uniquely begotten son, because he said so on at least 2 occasions when nobody was petitioning, when nobody was pleading, when Christ himself was not seeking to be elevated, exalted above. In that moment, Father God was silent. And Jesus, having made that petition, comes back and finds the inner circle, not just the 12. It would have been one thing if it had been the 12. But these who had experienced the transfiguration, these who were his inner circle of who he's been pouring into, even though Peter, the denier, was included in these, they were still in the inner circle. And he's just spoken that Peter was going to deny him, but it didn't exclude Peter from getting inner circle privileges. And he comes back and he finds them sleeping. And he speaks to them and he tells them, he adds prayer to the watch now. And he comes back and tells God, Hua. Hua. Lord, I hear what you're saying. When God didn't say anything. When there was no audible voice. When there was no manifestation of his words. He comes back and he tells God, Hua. Because it's one thing to hear it. But he says heard, understood, and acknowledged. Heard, Father, that this cup may not pass away from me. Heard. Except I drink it, understood. Thy will be done, acknowledged. Hua! Hua! We need a few more huas in our life.
Amen.
But see, this one did not come after. Jesus didn't hua after, this is my son with whom I'm well pleased. Either time. There was no hua. But in his time of anguish, when he's asking for a cup to be, when he's asking for relief, when he's asking for a hard time to pass him by, the purpose of the mission outweighed the process that he would have to go through. He will crush your head, but you will bruise his heel. All of this that he was about to go through. You will bruise your heel. Yeah. Thank you. Amen. See, I told you there's nobody like my wife.
Amen.
Amen. Amen. Hoo-ah. But it was spoken that he would go through these things. It was spoken. He knew that Peter was going to deny him. He knew that Judas would betray him. And that's just the beginning of the hurt and everything that he had to be going through. He was flesh as much as he was God. So all of these things didn't just bounce off him, slide off him, roll off him like a duck, water on a duck's back, like we like to say, like I like to say. Press on. But yeah, those things did hurt. Those things did affect. Knowing that he was going to have to be scourged the way he was. Knowing that he would have to go to the cross and endure that. Knowing that in the midst of all this anguish, being the physical anguish on the cross, now he's being made fun of. Railed on by the guy that's on the cross as well. It's bad enough that the people down here, okay, they're making fun. Oh, he said he saved others. He can't even save himself. They're down there. But somebody else that's on the cross too has the gall to be going back and forth? Really? Been me up there? I'm like, oh, no. Hold up. No, that ain't gonna happen. I know. I can take it from you. You know. No. Even up here on the cross, he could have done some kind of miracle to shut that dude up. To shut him up. Just go, muted his tongue, just put him on timeout, talking time. He could have done it. But he endured even in the midst of his pain on the cross, he still found it to forgive someone. Even his words on the cross, Father, forgive them for they know not what they do. In the midst of his pain, in the midst of his anguish, found it in his heart to forgive. But the answer to his petition, the answer to his question was in God's silence. Hard to believe. Hard to believe. But when God has an assignment, when he has a task, he will speak it. When he has an assignment for us, when he has a task, he will speak it. He will let us learn through situations and circumstances. He will let us learn through those. Without a doubt. Think back to when David was fleeing Saul. And they were hiding in the cave. And Saul came in to relieve himself. And everybody that was around David was saying, oh, truly God has delivered him into your hands. This man has been pursuing David, trying to kill David, trying to take David out. David's hiding. David is taking special purpose not to fight back against Saul. And here it is. In this moment when David has all his dudes around him and he's hiding and Saul comes in. And this would be the perfect moment for David to be able to take Saul out. And everybody around him is saying, truly this is God. Go ahead and kill him. Go ahead and kill him. He could have interpreted that situation. He could have looked at the circumstances and said, you know what, y'all right. But he went with what he knew he had to do. And he had to honor God. And in honoring God, he had to honor the anointing that God had placed upon Saul. He had to honor that anointing. He chose to honor that anointing. He did, rather than interpret the situation, and I'm saying that to warn us as believers, be careful with our interpretation of situations as being God's will.
All right.
Because we can look at an obstacle and say, well, it wasn't meant for us to be there. We can look at an open road, an open door, and say, oh, God must have done that. Let me press right on through that. Be careful how we interpret situations as being from God. David kept God in the middle of it, kept God in the forefront, kept his eyes on the Lord. If David's eyes had been on David and his situation, Saul wouldn't have seen another day. Saul wouldn't have seen another day. If Jesus' eyes had been only on Jesus, we would not be here worshiping today. We would not be here worshiping today. Not the way we are. Not in spirit and in truth.
I know that's right.
We would not be here worshiping if Jesus' eyes had stayed on himself. But even in his petition and all the angst and anguish and everything that he was going through, even in all of that, Jesus was able to say, not my will. Thy will be done. And in the moment he said that, God didn't even have to answer. Who are Jesus? The silence. The answer was in silence. It doesn't get any better than that. God did not have to speak. But all the way back in Genesis when God spoke that was going to happen, that had to happen, in the moment when Jesus asked and God did not answer. God did not answer. God did not have to answer. Why? Because his command, his request, his petition that it be done is unchanging. If Moses couldn't negotiate his way out of doing it, well, I have a speech impediment. I can't. So he sent Joshua. But Joshua never had to speak. The command of God outweighs everything else. The command does not change. The command, the order, the placement does not change. Our situation, our circumstance may change, but it does not change. It does not change. That's why, in the moment when he asked, and there was no answer, he goes back and he finds his ministry not behaving the way they should. He can go back before the Lord and say, who are? And here's the thing. Verse 44, and he left them, and he went away again, and prayed a third time, saying the same words. Saying the same words. When he comes back, he says, who are the first time? The adrenaline's flowing. and everything, and he comes back a third time, and he finds him doing again? Again, you're asleep? Hoo-ah! Hoo-ah, God! Hoo-ah! Let it be done. Let it be done. One petition, two hoo-ahs. One petition, two hoo-ahs. You got a hoo-ah, God. It's okay to ask. It's okay to ask. Lord, what next? Lord, what's new? Lord, is this it? Lord, is this it? When you get that answer, however that answer may come, Jesus, the answer was in the silence. And the reason he could hear the answer that was in the silence, because the petition was dotted with, nonetheless, not my will, but yours. That opened his ears. That opened his ears to God. That opened his ears to hear a resounding answer in the resounding silence. When you are submitted to do God's will, there are times when he doesn't even have to speak and you know what to do.
So
When you're submitted to God, committed, submitted, he won't even have to speak sometimes. And you will know in your knower, simply because that Holy Spirit within you will take you back to that command. Will take you back to the purpose for your mission. To take you back to the reason why God put you there in the first place. It will take you. He will take you there. That old song by the Staple Singers, I'll take you there. That's what the Holy Spirit is singing to us. Submit to God. Ask for the answer. I'll take you there. Hoo-ah. 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 Amen?
Amen.
Amen. It's so good. God is